Guy Daniels woke up early on Saturday, July 13th with a mission. That morning, Guy wanted to wake up before his son Dennis to sneak off to Walmart to buy a last-minute birthday present. He had ordered a remote control airplane online, but it failed to show up on time. Guy planned to return it when it finally arrived. He chose a white and red propeller plane with flight assistance for beginner and intermediate users, which Guy hoped would help Dennis avoid a crash while he learned the controls. Dennis was turning 7, and although he possessed a mechanical wit and impressive focus, Guy thought he and his son both would have cried if he wrecked the $100 plane during its first flight. While at Walmart, Guy found a gift bag big enough to fit the toy and some tissue paper. He wrapped the gift in the parking lot before picking up some Krispy Kremes and heading home. By the time Guy arrived back at the house, Dennis was distracted watching cartoons with his 15-year-old cousin Leah. She and her mother, Guy's sister Casey, lived with them. Guy had always taken care of Casey, especially since the unmentionable event which left her pregnant and alone. Even after months of therapy, Casey had never been able to recall exactly what happened that night. The senior Mr. and Mrs. Daniels, strict adherents to fundamentalist values, had kicked Casey out of the house after learning of her pregnancy. In their eyes, whatever happened to Casey must have been her fault. Guy, having recently moved out of the house at that time, took his little sister in, and she had stayed ever since. Lindsay Daniels, Guy's wife, experienced conflicting feelings around having her sister-in-law and niece around all the time. When she married Guy, he told her Casey and Leah would not always live with them, that he only planned to support his sister until she was able to do so on her own. That was 10 years ago, and despite Casey's best efforts, financial independence still seemed a far-off goal. But Leah behaved like a big sister towards Dennis and never complained when she had to babysit him. All 3 adults in the household worked full-time, so Leah kept an eye on Dennis after school every day, free of charge, foregoing athletics or clubs that might have otherwise interested her. If she ever complained about the responsibility, she quickly apologized. Wise beyond her years, Leah understood and accepted the unfairness of life. What had happened to her mother wasn't fair, and it wasn't fair that her aunt and uncle had to house and feed them. The counter to unfairness, Leah decided early on, was love. She learned to love Dennis like her own brother, an example set by Guy, who loved her like his very own daughter. Casey was attempting to make breakfast when Guy walked in with the donuts and gift bag. The entire house smelled like burnt eggs. "Oh, thank God," she said upon seeing the Krispy Kreme box. "Sorry, I should have told you I was bringing breakfast," Guy said. Casey took the box out of Guy's full hands, saying, "Oh, you always get donuts for the kids' birthdays. I just forgot." "Where's Lindsay?" Casey nodded over her shoulder while scraping papery brown flakes off the bottom of Guy's favorite pan and said, "Still sleeping. What'd you two flip a coin last night to see who had to run the errands this morning?" Guy laughed. "I'd rather be a little tired than have her be grumpy all day." "I heard that." Lindsay's raspy morning voice startled them both. Guy drew her in for a hug and a brief, smelly kiss. Lindsay whispered, "Have you told our boy happy birthday yet?" "No, I wanted to surprise him with the donuts," Guy replied, gazing down into her eyes. Then he drew back a step, tilted his head, and bellowed, "Birthday donuts!" Enough noise for 3 7-year-olds preceded Dennis stampeding into the kitchen. He barreled into Guy's arms and squeezed his midsection. Guy smashed his hands into both sides of Dennis's head and tilted it back until their eyes met. "Happy birthday, son." Guy stooped to kiss the top of his head. "Did you get any cream-filled?" Dennis asked hopefully. Guy nodded with a hero's confidence. Leah joined them, and they all stood around the kitchen devouring donuts. Guy told himself he would only eat half of one, but then he wanted to try half of another, and after Lindsay failed to finish her second donut, he did it for her. Once everyone but the kids were properly catatonic, they moved to the living room for sugared-up Dennis to open his presents. Dennis opened a new set of colored pencils from Leah and a Nintendo Switch game from his Aunt Casey. He thanked them both in turn, then turned his focus to the big one, meaning the gift bag Guy snuck home earlier. He examined it like a bomb he needed to defuse. Guy said, "It's just tissue paper, bud. Just rip it off." I know, Dennis assured. "I like the suspense, though." "Ah," said Guy. In his own time, Dennis unwrapped the plane. He stood, astonished, holding the box in front of himself for over 10 seconds while reading the list of features printed on it. "Can we try it?" he finally asked. "You cannot under any circumstances fly that thing in the house," Lindsay warned. Dennis laughed. "I know, Mom. I mean, can we go to a park or something?" "A park would be fun. How about Gibbons?" Guy asked, thinking of the open hill behind Gibbons Park. Dennis glowed. "Yeah, Dad, that would be perfect." Casey and Leah stayed home while Guy, Lindsay, and Dennis went to Gibbons Park for the RC Plane's Virgin flight. At the top of the hill behind the playground, Dennis tried to read along while Guy reviewed the instruction manual. Once he thought he got the gist of it, Guy asked, "Do you want me to try it first, or do you want to?" "I'll do it," Dennis cheered. "All right then." Guy set the flight assist switch on the remote to beginner and handed the plane to his son. "You hold it steady in the middle and push the throttle, that's the joystick here, up about 2/3 of the way, then throw it straight forward. Got it?" "Got it." Dennis took the controller and carefully balanced the plane between the thumb and index finger of his right hand. He nudged the throttle into position, leaned back, and launched. In a flash of sunlight, Dennis's plane curved up into the sky. The boy clutched the remote to his stomach as he fiddled with the joysticks, testing their sensitivity and watching how they affected the aircraft. Lindsay put her head on Guy's shoulder, and their fingers weaved together between their hips. "How high does it go?" Dennis asked wondrously. "The manual says 600 feet, Guy said. 600 feet? That's crazy, Lindsay privately remarked. Dennis asked, "How high is that?" Guy looked up at the dimensionless expanse of perfect blue above the park and said, "I don't know, but you probably wouldn't be able to see it that high up anyway." A branch snapped somewhere in the woods and stole Guy's attention for a split second. He glanced only briefly into the trees, seeing nothing and deciding there was nothing to be seen. Lindsay got bored after a few minutes of watching the plane zip back and forth and announced she was going for a short walk. Guy kissed her farewell and crouched next to his son. "Want to see if it can do a barrel roll?" After nearly 20 minutes of craning his neck watching Dennis's plane zip about, boredom made Guy easily distracted. Across the park, a small group of young adults were playing basketball. Guy soon found himself watching them twice as intently as the plane. But Dennis was happy and entertained, and on his birthday, that's what mattered the most. Lindsay had not yet returned from her walk, and Guy could not blame her. They had been blessed with a beautiful day. Dennis tried his very best to keep the zippy plane away from the trees. The old cedars made him nervous. Their branches all looked like greedy snares to him. The trees were so tall, he knew if his plane got caught in them, they would not get it down. Fortunately, the stillness of the air posed no threat of blowing the plane into the trees. With the plane so high in the air, even a slight breeze could have put it at risk. Dennis decided to figure out just how high 600 feet really was. He pointed the plane's nose straight up and drove his thumb against the maxed-out throttle. It climbed higher and higher. Dennis's other thumb accidentally pressed against the other joystick, causing the rising plane to roll. This happy accident produced a corkscrew stunt that brought a wide smile to little Dennis's focused face. "Dad, look!" Guy turned away from the basketball game. In the corner of his eye, he noticed movement amongst the trees, close to the ground. He glanced at the spiraling plane and said, "Cool, bud, just make sure you can still control it." Then he looked back to where he had seen the motion. His father's words ringing in his ears, Dennis lowered the throttle and righted the plane to start bringing it down. It had become a white speck. He guessed it had to be close to 600 feet up. On the way down, Dennis had a hard time telling how close the plane was to the trees. He slowed its descent to maintain control. Guy scanned the trees but could find nothing living but the plants themselves. Still, the uncanny feeling of being watched tickled his spine. Dennis realized not a moment too soon he was bringing the plane down directly into the woods. He corrected the fatal trajectory and swooped the aircraft over the tops of the tallest cedars, breathing a sigh of relief as it passed over them unscathed. But devoid of any wind, one of the branches reached out of the wall of green leaves like an arm, interrupting the plane's path. Dennis helplessly shouted, "Dad!" as his plane crashed into the mesh of leaves. Before Guy looked, the sentient branch retracted, pulling the plane into the foliage. Then all went still again. The brand new plane hung helplessly from its tail, 60 feet in the air. "Aw, Dennis, how'd that happen?" Guy asked. Dennis could not answer. His lower lip quivered. Guy mistook this reaction as embarrassment or sadness. Maybe Dennis thought he would be angry with him. Guy was certainly upset to see his $100 suspended in the trees, but he also knew he had not been paying attention when he should have been. When a tear leaked down Dennis's cheek, Guy hugged him. Embarrassment and sadness were certainly ingredients in Dennis's quivering, but the main flavor came from fear. He didn't know how to tell his dad that he had not crashed the plane, that the tree had snatched it from him out of the air. "What's going on?" Lindsay asked, coming up behind them. She quickly noticed the plane and put a hand on Dennis's shoulder. "Oh, that's a bummer. Can we get it down?" Guy took the remote from his wordless son and fiddled with the controls. The propeller turned when he pushed the throttle, but the plane would not move even after he switched the flight assist off and took full control. "Sorry, bud. I guess we can come back later to see if it falls out on its own." Dennis nodded, but held no hope that the plane would fall. The tree took it, stole it directly from his control. And although he could not understand why or how it had happened, he felt the tree would probably not give it back. But he was wrong. The family went home and shared the disappointing news with Casey and Leah. To cheer Dennis up, Leah suggested they try out the new Switch game her mother had given him. It distracted him intermittently, but as they played, the memory of that branch reaching out and grabbing the plane nagged at Dennis's attention. They ordered Papa John's for dinner and shared birthday cake afterwards. Dennis put on a cheerful face for the others, but his mood did not improve until an hour later, after the doorbell rang. "Who could that be so late?" Lindsay asked. They were all watching Dennis's favorite movie, The Incredibles. Casey said, "I'll go check," and went to the door. They heard her open it and say, "Hello?" Then she gasped, "Dennis, come here." Dennis gave his parents a questioning look, but both shrugged. He looked at Leah. She made an uncertain frown and nodded toward the door. Dennis slipped off the couch and went to his Aunt Casey. She stepped aside, holding the door open for him to see, resting on the porch, his plane. Somehow it had come down from the trees and been returned to him. But by whom? Nobody was outside. Even after Dennis and Casey stepped onto the porch, they could find no one. Guy was happy to see the plane returned and undamaged, no less, but it bothered him that whoever had returned it somehow knew where to find them, yet did not stick around to say hi. If it had been someone they knew, why hadn't they stayed? The unsettling feeling he experienced near the woods returned. In the end, however, he decided not to let his personal misgivings dampen the joy Dennis expressed upon holding his precious airplane again. Little did Guy know that despite his smiles and cheers, the joyful little boy shared the same suspicious feelings as him. The next day, Leah offered to take Dennis back to Gibbons Park to fly the plane again after dinner. After Dennis promised he would keep the plane away from the trees this time, they were given permission and left on their bicycles. When they rolled into the parking lot, Dennis stopped. Leah pulled a sharp U-turn to see what was the matter. "Can we just fly it here over the parking lot?" Dennis asked. Leah said, "No, I don't think that's a great idea. It could, hit a car or something." Dennis dejectedly replied, "Okay," and started to pedal. Leah observed her cousin's general aversion to the woods as he set up and flew the plane. He insisted on standing at the bottom of the hill near the playground, even though the top would have given him a much better view. Even while laser-focused, he frequently glanced at the trees on either side of the hill, too. The woods wrapped partially around the hill, sticking out like sideburns. "Hey, Dennis," Leah finally asked. "Dennis! Denny boy!" "What?" he replied, his least favorite nickname breaking his focus. "What's with you in the woods today? You scared of them or something?" "Don't talk about the woods," Dennis said. Leah took a mental step back. Her little cousin sounded angry, almost threatening. Her question must have really poked something deep. She guessed his anger was just a mask for his true feeling, fear. "Hey, it's all right if you're afraid of them. I was actually scared of ponds and lakes and stuff until I was 8. We can't really help what we're afraid of, but sometimes it helps to talk through it. Maybe you'll figure out how to, overcome your fear that way, right?" "Please, can we just not talk about it?" Dennis asked, less angry but still as insistent. Leah shrugged. "Okay." Dennis could feel them, eyes upon his back. He felt them because his stupid cousin had been talking about the woods, and now he couldn't stop thinking about them. He almost said no when Leah offered to take him to Gibbons Park because he didn't want to be near those secretive trees. He only accepted the offer because the stupid plane was just so fun to fly. Now, with his plane in the air, his attention had been stolen by the whispering voices behind the hill, the rattling of the looming trees. The sun was just starting to set. A gradient of purple and indigo glowed behind the lively trees. Darkness would be creeping through them soon, washing them black. Responding to an urge to make sure the woods were not already shrouded in darkness, Dennis braved a quick glance toward them. The sideburns still basked in some diminished light. He felt watchful eyes again and lingered his gaze a moment longer. And to his absolute horror, it appeared a tree was staring back at him. Their gazes locked. The longer Dennis stared, the clearer the ill-defined outline of a person nested in the branches appeared to him. The figure looked almost totally transparent. The eyes turned away, and the figure disappeared. Dennis let go of the joysticks. "I want to go home. I want to go home right now." The remote swung down by his side as he hurriedly marched toward their bikes. Leah cried, "Dennis! Dennis, the plane!" He paid her no mind. Its propeller nearly stopped, and the plane wobbled in the air. The breeze would keep it aloft for a few seconds, but not long. Leah sprinted forward and snatched the remote out of Dennis's limp grip. He kept marching on. Despite having not flown the plane yet, Leah managed to prevent it from falling out of the air. Landing it almost ended in disaster, but the plane crashed in the sand volleyball pit near the parking lot, so lived to fly another day. Leah told Lindsay about Dennis's strange behavior after he went to bed that night. Lindsay could not speculate or recall any reason Dennis might fear the woods. The only possibility she drafted was that he was afraid of losing his plane again. "No, it seemed bigger than that," Leah said. "It was like he thought the woods were gonna reach out and take him." The weekend came, and with it more beautiful weather. Weather so nice, Guy Daniels thought it might be fun to go to a certain park and fly a certain plane. When served this offer, Dennis politely turned it down. "Oh, okay," Guy responded pitifully, sad his son had already lost the excitement for the toy he hoped they could use to bond a little. Dennis noticed the hurt in his father's voice and told him to wait. Could we fly the plane somewhere else? He asked. Guy grinned. Sure, did you have somewhere in mind? No, not really. I'm just bored of the park, I guess. Okay, bud, no worries. How about the municipal fields across from City Hall? Dennis could not picture them, but since the fields across from City Hall were not Gibbons Park, he agreed to go there. When they arrived, however, a terrible revelation greeted Dennis. Trees. Woods. Across the street from City Hall, the municipal fields lay empty. Most games were held on weekday evenings. Dennis had noticed the fields before, but he failed to recall the woods behind them when he had agreed to come. Hey, Dad? He asked as his dad opened the trunk to retrieve the plane. Yeah, bud? Staring across the field, Dennis asked, Are those the same woods that are by Gibbons Park? Oh, sure, Guy replied. That's like a little finger reaching into town from the main forest, which is what Gibbons is next to. People have tried to develop that land before, but it never works out. But it's great because we have this nice patch of nature growing right in the middle of town, huh? Yeah, Dennis said absently. A little finger. That's all the trees were. Besides, they were miles from Gibbons Park. What were the chances whatever he thought he had seen in the trees there could find him so far away? Unlike at Gibbons Park, the municipal fields provided ample space away from the trees. Dennis soon forgot about them and started having as much fun flying the plane as he had the first day, before he knew trees could snatch things out of the air. Guy took turns with the remote, testing out different stunts and showing his son how to do the ones that worked. With the sun behind them, their shadows grew long. Guy's almost touched the forest finger by the time he told Dennis it would be time to leave in 5 minutes. Okay, I'll do one more dive, Dennis said. He raised the plane's nose, and they both watched it ascend. A text from Lindsay distracted Guy before the plane reached its pinnacle. He read, Casey took Leah to a movie. Family movie night here? Neither Guy focused on his response, nor Dennis, who had just tipped the plane's nose downward, noticed the bald-headed turkey vulture swoop into its path. As the toy dove in near freefall, the vulture intercepted it. It wrapped its talons around the wings and jerked itself in a sharp turn toward the trees. Dad! Dennis shouted. Guy looked up from his phone. What the heck? That vulture just stole my plane, Dennis needlessly explained. Laughing, Guy said, I can't believe that just happened. Did you see it was a vulture? Sure it wasn't a hawk? Yeah, Dad, I saw its bald head. Guy said, Huh, that's weird behavior for a vulture. He probably dropped it once he figured out it's not food. Should we go have a look before it gets dark? No, it looked like he took it really far, Dennis said. Then, more honestly, I don't want to go into the woods. Well, how about you wait out here and I'll go look then? It didn't look like he went that far. Dennis begged, Please don't. What would I do if you got lost? These woods aren't that deep, Guy said. I'll be fast. Dad, please. A little more stern than he meant to sound, Guy said, Dennis, I spent $100 on that plane and I'm not just going to walk away without looking for it. If you don't want to, I won't make you, but I'm going to take a look. Dennis watched his father walk across the soccer field. The automatic lights turned on as Guy passed beneath one of them. It erased his shadow and made the woods look much darker as he stepped through the trees. Dennis remained planted where Guy had left him, watching, listening. After too long with no signal from his father, Dennis started to sweat. He thought of those eyes again, of the tree reaching out its branch. He thought most of all of the watchful sensation, in part because it had returned. He considered how far his dad could have journeyed into the woods and decided he could not be too far yet. Before he could think himself out of it, he ran to the trees. Dad, he shouted. Just give me a couple more minutes, Guy replied. Dennis yelled, I'm going to come find you. Okay, just follow my voice. Fists clenched. Dennis entered the woods. Are you being serious? Is this a joke? Because it's not funny, Lindsay said over the phone. I wouldn't joke about this, Guy replied. Lindsay, I can't find him. What was he doing in the woods? Lindsay demanded, but she quickly said, Never mind, it doesn't matter. I'll be there in a few minutes. Call me if he turns up. I will. I think I'm going to call the cops too, Guy said. Guy, don't panic. He's only been missing for a few minutes. The woods aren't that deep there. No, but they connect to the forest and it's starting to get dark. I'd rather call the police over nothing than learn that something bad happened and we did nothing. Lindsay took a long pause before saying, Okay, do what you think is best. I'll be there soon. Dennis had not turned up or replied to any of Guy's calls by the time Lindsay arrived. A police officer had rolled up just before her. The police station was connected to City Hall, so the officer had been parked almost directly across the street when Guy called. When Lindsay walked up to them, Guy was in the middle of explaining what had happened to the officer. So I told him to follow my voice. We went back and forth yelling Marco Polo, and I thought it sounded like he was getting closer. I was looking up in the trees for the plane, so I didn't see anything happen, but I didn't hear anything either. Just one time I yelled Marco and he didn't respond. That's when I backtracked to the soccer field and realized he'd disappeared. Okay, so you think he's still in the woods? The officer asked. She looked around Guy to inspect the trees. The last time I heard his voice, he was almost to me. We were pretty deep in. The officer turned to observe the setting sun and grimaced. Into her radio, she asked, Sarge, could I get a couple more here for a search? Casey gasped and looked like she might throw up on the theater floor as the credits began to roll and she checked her silenced phone for the first time. Leah, grab your purse. We need to go. Now. Leah whispered, What's going on, Mom? Ushering her daughter past other moviegoers in the row, Casey whispered, They can't find Dennis. The pair rushed over to the municipal fields. They saw Guy and Lindsay's cars parked there, as well as 3 police cars. This can't really be happening, Leah said. I'm going to go see if I can help, said Casey. Leah said, Yeah, me too. No, Casey replied, almost scolding her. Leah, if somebody... She choked momentarily. If somebody did something, they could still be around. I want you to stay out here where it's safe. Keep an eye out to see if Dennis comes back on his own. Isn't that what the cop is for? Leah pointed to an officer stationed at the edge of the trees, looking bored. Stay here, Casey repeated. She got out and locked the car behind her. Leah saw her speak briefly with the officer by the trees and show him her ID. He allowed her into the woods and said something into his radio. As soon as Casey vanished, Leah unlocked the car and stormed across the field toward the officer. Hi, I'm Leah Daniels. I'm Dennis's cousin. I'm here to... Sorry, the officer interrupted. Your mom told me not to let you go in there, and I really have to agree it doesn't seem like a great idea right now. There's 2 officers and the kid's parents looking already anyway. The best thing you can do right now is keep yourself safe. Leah balled her fists, but tempered her rage. She possessed too much determination to let this cop stop her from finding her cousin. But she knew arguing with him would go nowhere, and time was of the essence. Yeah, you're right. Okay, thank you, she said before plodding back to the car. Once there, she took off running. The cop watched her go until she rounded the block at the end of the street, then shrugged. Leah ran just over 2 miles to Gibbons Park. The whole time she thought about Dennis's strange behavior there, particularly regarding the woods. He seemed scared of them, and now he had disappeared inside them. It seemed there could definitely be a connection there. Did she like the thought of going into the woods alone at sunset? No, not at all. But she wasn't going to wait for someone else to show up while who knows what happened to her cousin. She had to find him, and find him fast. Leah ran until she reached the hill between the playground and the woods. She caught her breath as she escalated the soft slope and paused when she reached the summit. Despite her elevation, the trees loomed above her. The faded sun turned their tops into formless masses of shadow. Leah delayed no longer in her race against the sun. She bounded down the hill and slipped into the trees, A bottomless silence surrounded her. Even her own footsteps were deadened by the vegetation before they reached her ears. She snapped branches along the way to mark her path, and their crisp breaks were also muted. Clear and strong, she called, "Dennis!" expecting her voice to travel farther. It seemed to die against the next tree. But then, defying all odds, Dennis's voice answered her. "Leah? Leah, is that you?" he cried weakly, just to the right and no telling how far ahead. Moving toward his voice, Leah called, "Yeah, are you hurt?" A moment passed, possibly in hesitation, before Dennis said, "I don't think so." There was something in his voice that did not sit well with her. She decided to call for some professional backup, but found her thigh flat when she slipped her hand down for her phone. She groaned, realizing she had left her phone in her mom's car before approaching the puppy dog cop who wouldn't let her join the search. "Okay, just me," she whispered to herself, immediately cursing herself for uttering the vulnerability aloud. To Dennis, she yelled, "Good. Stay there and let me come to you. Don't move. Just keep talking to me." Silence passed. "Dennis?" More silence. Leah picked up her pace, snapping small branches along the way to mark her trail back. Real primal fear squeezed her throat and made her hand shake. It took all her will to funnel the adrenaline into forward motion rather than turn and run back to safety. She tried again. "Dennis?" This time he responded, "You're close. Keep coming." "Are you coming towards me too?" Leah asked. "I can't." "Why?" Silence again. Leah knew the smart thing to do was to go for help. If Dennis was stuck, as he seemed or at least claimed to be, wouldn't he still be there by the time she returned with his parents and the cops? The question mark at the end of that sentence is what pushed her onward instead of backward. She could not fathom the guilt she would feel if something happened to Dennis because she was too scared to help. "Say something," she commanded. "Over here," Dennis responded only a handful of yards to her right. She had almost passed him. Man, it's getting dark, she thought. She wove through the trees, bumping into some on the way to a thick trunk that looked like it had been hit by lightning or blown over, or both. It still stood as tall as two of her, even with its top half rotting on the ground beside it. The hollowed-out trunk was open on one side like an enormous hot dog bun, and within the dark crevice, Leah saw two small eyes reflecting the last of the light. "Dennis, are you hiding in there? It's me. You can come out of there." Dennis stepped forward, turning sideways to slip through the gap. Tears soaked his cheeks, pooling in the corners of his downturned mouth. Leah froze. She knew something was horribly wrong, even before her cousin stepped out far enough to reveal the filthy hand on his shoulder, or the knife it held to his throat. Behind Dennis, a tall, muddy figure emerged. Tangled hair hung down to its chest and back, obscuring its face. It wore nothing but camouflaging mud on its torso, but the figure was so emaciated, Leah could not tell whether it was male or female. She could see most of the bones in its chest, arms, and legs. When the figure's lower half entered the light, Leah saw it wore leather wrapped around its waist and loins, further obscuring its sex. Its legs were no thicker than its arms, and its feet gnarled, bony, and scarred. The knife it held to Dennis's throat, upon closer investigation, appeared to be a jagged rock sharpened to a point. Still holding him, the figure pushed Dennis towards Leah, who found herself too scared to run. The skeletal figure loomed over them both. Then, in an unmistakably male voice, he said, "Follow me." The forest man took them to a ramshackle hut deeper in the woods. He made Leah walk out front while he directed from behind with a knife to Dennis's throat. Leah continued subtly snapping branches in case a chance to run arose, but realized they would probably not be able to see the path she had made back to Gibbons Park in the dark. Horrified, she realized they might be stuck with the disturbed man until sunrise, if they made it that long, unless the search party discovered them. By the time the hut appeared, Leah had already decided she and Dennis would need to play along until they had no option but to fight. "Go," the man ordered when Leah paused in front of the hut. It had no door, only an uneven, shadowy opening for her to enter. She could see nothing inside but a nervous whimper from Dennis when the man tightened his grip, prompted her to keep moving forward. "Stop," the man ordered once they were all inside. He then turned and, unexpectedly, released Dennis back outside. "Go on. I do not need you anymore." "I don't know where to go," Dennis cried. Leah looked on, helplessly, her fear for her cousin functioning as a distraction from the fear for herself. The man said, "Go where the forest takes you. Be gone." Dennis looked back at Leah one last time before stumbling away from the hut and running into the trees. "Look for the broken branches, Dennis," Leah screamed after him. The man slapped her across the cheek. He brushed the hair out of his face, but it was too dark to make out his features. He pressed the knife against her throat, pushed her against the wall made of logs, and breathed heavily down upon her. "You stay right here," he sneered. "Do not move." He left her to go do something in the dark. It seemed to Leah he could see quite well in the blackness. A match spat and hissed before the man transferred its flame to a candle, which he then set on a large flat rock in the middle of the hut. It looked like he may have built the hut around that rock. It was rusty, with stained blood. Leah also saw a row of cages made from sticks. Most were empty, but one held a frightened rabbit and the other a frantic squirrel. The man ran his jagged rock across the bars of those two cages, letting it bounce along them as he walked toward a shadowed corner. There, he picked something up and placed it on his head. When he re-entered the light, he was wearing a sort of crown, a leather band with 2 deer antlers attached. The man ruffled his hair until it covered the strap and made it appear the horns were growing from his own skull. Thus prepared, he turned sharply toward Leah and reached his arms out to his sides. "I am Cernunnos," he spoke, bold and clear. "I am the protector, cultivator, and master of the forests. All of nature bows to me." The man who called himself Cernunnos stepped slightly outside of the candle's glow until he became a dark silhouette. Leah could not see the expressions on his face, but his broad and intimidating gestures expressed all she needed to see. "Every blade of grass you step over and every bush you've passed folds to my will. One cannot escape me." "You're insane," Leah snarled. She guessed Dennis might have made it far enough away for her to attempt an escape. Her kidnapper's vision seemed much better than hers in the dark, though, so she wasn't sure she could outrun him. She thought she probably should try to before the freak tied her up or something, though. The man pushed his hair back behind his antlers and continued as if she had said nothing. "You need not fear my powers, however." He struck a match and lit a second candle in front of himself, then turned so Leah could finally see his face, and finished, "Daughter." Feeling violated by this demented claim, Leah almost bolted out the door and took her chances, but the man's eyes stopped her. Despite the crow's feet in the corners and the dirt smeared around them, his eyes were her own. It was more than the eyes themselves, it was the way his nose curved between them. Leah had never met another person with a nose like hers, shaped so oddly she could never find a pair of sunglasses that would stay on her face. Okay, no, he's probably not my dad. That would be insane. But if he thinks he is, he probably won't hurt me, right? Not if I behave. For now. Leah decided, since she doubted she could outrun the man who called himself Cernunnos, she would hear him out while simultaneously plotting a more strategic escape. You see it, don't you? Don't respond, just show him you're paying attention. I know I do. Cernunnos put a finger on the side of his nose, right between his eyes, indicating he saw the similarity too. I'm sure your mother never told you about me. I don't think she believed who I really was. She had so many doubts. She didn't tell me anything about you except what you did to her, Leah could not withhold from saying. A glimpse of sadness crossed Cernunnos' face, but he quickly replaced it with a petulant sneer and said, And here you are. You're welcome. Ugh, Leah spat. Despite your feelings, you have had your time with your mother, and now it is time to learn who I can make you. It will take years, decades perhaps, but you will serve me, and in turn I shall teach you my ways. What about my family? They'll come looking for me, Leah said. Cernunnos looked upward and said, I will command the forests to protect us. He froze with his arms out, palms up, and his head back. Leah wasted no time. Pivoting on her heels, she dashed out the door and started running in as straight a line as she could without running into a tree. She heard Cernunnos scream behind her, but did not slow to listen for his pursuing footsteps. She expected one of her feet to snare on an exposed root or fallen branch with every step, but somehow she managed to keep a steady pace until a frightened rabbit ran out between her feet and almost toppled her over. She caught herself, but had to pause to reorient and listen for Cernunnos. Which way had she been running? She stooped low to look for her footsteps. A cold branch touched her shoulder. It snaked toward her neck and slithered toward her earlobe. Leah bolted up and pushed the branch away. She had no idea which way she should go, but picked a direction and ran. Every branch, every bush, every stem and leaf felt like a hand, a finger, a tongue, reaching out and searching for her. He got in your head, she told herself. Her legs wanted to stop, and half her brain told her she was wasting her efforts, that nature would win. But the other half said that was as crazy as the man who put the idea in her head. Her heart said, Keep going, girl. You can make it. And she listened. Dennis Daniels! Dennis! A voice boomed somewhere ahead. Leah noticed a flash of light through the trees. She breathlessly yelled, I'm Leah Daniels. I need help. The light shone her direction, and she heard the voice say something muffled, then shout, Stay there. Let me come to you. Leah stopped only long enough to shout, I can't. He's chasing me. This time she heard the man ahead, a police officer, say into his radio, Hey, I need additional units on me. Leah ran toward the light and the officer bearing it. Who's chasing you? He asked as she appeared before him, sweaty, dirty, but thankfully unharmed. I don't know, it's some crazy guy. Okay, why don't you get on up in front of me and I'll start walking you back. I've got backup coming. They can stay back to catch your guy. Any sign of your brother? My cousin, but yes, I found him and I helped him escape. Leah told the officer Dennis should have escaped to Gibbons Park. He radioed for someone to go check the park and requested additional backup to apprehend Cernunnos. 2 lights appeared ahead, coming towards them. The officer lifted a hand to wave at them, but it was snatched out of the air before he raised it above his head. Cernunnos tackled the officer to the ground, landing on top of him before pouncing off and vanishing again. Hey, hurry! Leah yelled at the approaching lights. She heard urgent voices, and the lights bounced toward her quicker as she helped the assaulted officer to his feet. Once he was up, Leah tried to run, but her shoelace caught on a plant growing near the ground. She stumbled. 2 firm hands caught her arm. She thought they belonged to one of the police officers until they yanked her in, held her against a gritty body, and put a jagged rock against her neck. "Let go of her," the officer said with calm authority as he aimed his light at Cernunnos and Leah. His hand hovered above his gun, but Leah guessed he would not be able to shoot as long as she was in the way. The other 2 officers joined the first, creating a triple beam that blinded Leah, forcing her to be still and listen carefully to know what was happening. "Sir, you need to put the rock down right now," one of the other officers, the woman who had arrived at the scene first, said. The police started to fan out and circle around. Cernunnos responded by slowly dragging Leah backward. As the lights became less concentrated, Leah could see again. In her hazy vision, she saw branches from above bending and reaching down towards each officer. One of them barked, "Stop!" "Look out!" Leah shouted at the same time, pointing behind the one in front of her. "Shh," Cernunnos gently scolded. His voice chilled her entire body below the skin. She had to get away. She could not decide whether the branches she saw straining to catch the police were actually moving or if the flashlights were creating an illusion. She did not know whether Cernunnos actually had power over the plants or if he was nothing more than a crazy person. She was so exhausted, mentally and physically, that she did not know what to believe anymore. One of the cops swatted at a branch that brushed his neck. Cernunnos laughed. Leah decided to take a massive risk. She tested the sharpness of the rock against her neck by pressing against it, slowly increasing pressure. She could feel the jagged edge compressing her throat muscles, and still the rock did not pierce her skin. So, no longer feeling she was a mere twitch away from death, she took another risk. She waved her hand down low, hoping at least one of the officers behind the halos of light would notice. Then, she held 3 fingers pointed down as if she were using baseball signals. She reduced to 2 fingers, then 1. When Leah closed her fist, indicating the end of the countdown, she turned her head and bit down on Cernunnos' arm holding the rock. "Go, go!" one of the officers shouted. At least one of them had noticed her countdown. Cernunnos pulled Leah's hair, but she kept her jaw clenched on his bony arm until 2 of the officers simultaneously tackled her attacker. After the third joined, they wrestled Cernunnos to the ground and forcefully negotiated his arms, one bleeding profusely, into handcuffs. Leah wiped the blood from her mouth. No branches appeared to be reaching down from above anymore, but Leah still feared the possibility of Cernunnos' power. "We need to hurry," she insisted. "Hold on, we gotta deal with him," the first officer who had found her replied. He was kneeling on Cernunnos' back, holding him down as he struggled despite the handcuffs. "I'm gonna go find my mom," Leah said. "Just hold on a minute, kid." On the edge of tears, Leah said, "No, I need my mom," and ran into the darkness. "Damn it, one of you go with her," the officer growled. Leah reunited with her mother, aunt, and uncle on the municipal soccer field. A squad car parked in the lot shortly after, and Lindsay Daniels sprinted towards it. Guy walked at a brisk pace behind her. Casey and Leah looked on as the arriving officer opened the back door of his car and little Dennis jumped out. He ran into the arms of his mother, and as she picked him up and squeezed him, Guy ran to them. This joyous and somewhat miraculous moment was juxtaposed by the arduous arrest of the man who called himself Cernunnos, the man who called himself Leah's father. With great difficulty, the police fought and dragged him all the way out of the woods and into one of their cars. That officer, plus an additional unit, drove the man to the hospital for an evaluation. "Shouldn't he be locked up?" Casey asked. Leah had not yet told her who the man claimed to be. An officer said, "Don't worry, ma'am. They'll keep him secure until he's checked out. Then he'll get booked straight into jail. Leah kept Cernunnos' paternity claim to herself, not even telling her mother. If she had, it might have taken the Daniels family longer than a week to ease back into their normal patterns. Leah played along during the transition, fooling everyone into thinking she had left the harrowing events behind her. To further distance themselves from that terrible night, the whole family spent the weekend up at the lake, renting a house directly on the water. One of the police officers had found Dennis's plane caught in a bush, so he was able to bring it with and fly it carefree. It felt good to be away from the people back home who stared at them every time they passed the house or pushed their cart past at the grocery store. It felt good not to be questioned, or to fearfully anticipate being questioned at every turn. The questions always came dressed in sympathy, but morbid curiosity is tough to fully disguise. Sunday afternoon, just hours before the family was supposed to load back up in the car and return home, Leah went for a walk up the road to think. She thought, as she almost always did during that week and many to come, about Cernunnos. Had he held any supernatural power or not? Was he actually her father? And if so, could he and would he have really taught her to use his magic? She looked up at the trees standing alongside the road. Would you have ever listened to me? What would I say to you? She watched a crow swoop down from a high branch and land near the lakeshore. Did you listen to him too? Would you have died if he told you to? Would you have killed me? A lilac bush up ahead had dropped so many petals in the grass it looked as if it was trying to paint its shadow purple. She paused at the plant and extended her right index finger toward one of the blossoms. Why would I ever want to control something so beautiful, something I don't understand? Nature should be no one's slave. I could have been its protector, sure, but it should have no master. Before she touched it, the lilac blossom reached out and kissed the tip of Leah's finger. She retracted her hand at the moment of touch, shocked and terrified. She looked at her hand, down at her hip, finger still pointed toward the lilac bush. Had she accidentally caused that to happen? Had it happened at all? A new possibility crossed her mind that she was as insane as her alleged father and was imagining the plants could move on their own or at the command of some forest god. But a small voice behind her dashed that theory to pieces. Whoa, Dennis said, 20 paces back up the road. Leah turned sharply and caught him staring at her, wide-eyed. What? She asked, trying to play it off. How did you do that? He asked. He mimed Leah's interaction with the flower, using one hand to imitate his cousin and the other to recreate the flower's action. If he saw it too, I couldn't have imagined it. Dennis stared at her, mouth open, waiting for an answer. Leah looked at the lilac bush, trying to think about what to say, but having trouble herself coming to grips with what she had done. But had she done anything? Not willingly, not consciously. Finally, she looked up at Dennis, her little cousin. She could not forget how she had almost lost him. She shrugged and said, "Must have been the wind." And as if laughing at an inside joke, the trees all around whispered and rattled. You made it out. Congratulations. If you enjoyed the story, please rate, like, review, or subscribe. For ad-free episodes and bonus Into the Woods episodes, become a patron with the link in the description. You can also support the show by buying merch. That link is also in the description below. To stay up to date, follow me on Instagram at The Warning Woods. If you feel ready, meet me here next week for another journey into the Warning Woods. Thank you for listening.